How can we stretch and transform our minds? Where can we find treasure troves of inspiration, insights, and information? How can we be better equipped, encouraged, and empowered to make a greater impact to the kingdom of God on earth? Psalm 119 declares, "Teach me, O Lord, the way of your statutes, and I shall keep it to the end. Give me understanding, and I shall keep your law. Indeed, I shall observe it with my whole heart. Make me walk in the path of your commandments, for I delight in it. Incline my heart to your testimonies and not to covetousness. Turn away my eyes from looking at worthless things. Revive me in your way. Establish your words to your servant, who is devoted to fearing you. Turn away my reproach, which I dread. For your judgments are good. Behold, I long for your precepts. Revive me in your righteousness." Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible. It's in the Psalms, of course. Psalm 119 is all about the law of God. And it says, if I know God's law, I know more than all my teachers. Libraries are seriously important. Libraries preserve truth and history and make accessible a treasure trove of wisdom, a treasure trove of insights and knowledge, of biographies and devotionals, examples of excellence, commentaries and dictionaries, handbooks, concordances, atlases, encyclopedias, and so much more. A library is like an armory. The library is the armory for any mission or college or ministry, providing spiritual weapons for spiritual warfare. Libraries are a collection of selected sources of information, made accessible for community, for reference or for borrowing. Reading is the magic key to take you where you want to be. They're also sanctuaries for serious systematic study. Libraries provide a quiet place for study. A good library provides a protected environment to preserve sources of knowledge, printed books and journals, but also audio and video digital resources are needed as well. A good library provides a sanctuary for serious study, a calm atmosphere for concentration, for systematic study, an inspiring environment for research, for assignments, for Bible studies, for sermon preparation. It's to equip and empower us. Readers make leaders. A reading Christian is a growing Christian. If you want to lead, you must read. In fact, the last quote is from Napoleon. Napoleon used to walk around handing out books to his generals saying, if you want to lead, you must read. And libraries provide time-tested tools to equip and empower you for exceptional ministry. We should stretch minds. Libraries are gymnasiums for the mind. As a gym is there to stretch your muscles, a library can be there to stretch your mind. Reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. Books are the quietest and most constant of friends. They're the most accessible and wisest of counselors and the most patient of teachers. A treasure trove of information, insights, and inspiration. A Bible college library is a gold mine of biblical knowledge, a treasure trove of information, instruction, insights, and inspiration. It can also be an oasis for searching souls and inquiring minds. Libraries are an oasis for searching souls and hungry minds, those who are inquiring. It can be a reservoir of living waters, a storehouse of spiritual food, providing information that can renew your mind, transform your life, and direct your energies. In fact, good libraries are an antidote to apostasy. In this age of apostasy, when so many are turning their back on the faith, we need libraries with reliable, old, tried, tested, battle-proven, faithful works of dedicated ministers, missionaries, and reformers. And this provides us with information to counteract ignorance. In this age of ignorance, we need libraries that are equipped with biblical knowledge and Christian answers for the challenges of our time. Libraries are also a solution to superficiality. We've seen a lot of things on the internet are getting censored. They say the moment you come up with any truth, the fact checkers come out and say, this is not true or not balanced or whatever. Particularly during the COVID cult, the lockdown lunacy, the masquerade madness. If you posted anything within seconds, it would be taken down, and the fact checkers had determined it's not true. And we never had fact checkers until the truth started getting out. When the billionaires controlled publishing and newspapers, and you had to be a billionaire to own a newspaper, it was no problem because they controlled it. But when desktop publishing was making it possible on the internet for a housewife or a student at home to get the truth out, then suddenly fact checkers came along, the thought police, to censor your thought crimes. And today, if you're reading on on an aircraft, you can attract a lot of attention. If you really want to give a sign of resistance, take a book to a public place and open it, and just see all the people pull out the cameras to get a picture. In this age of superficiality, we need libraries which will challenge us, enable us to dig deeper into the gold mines of God's Word. You know, you can pan for gold in some streams and find gold dust, but the big gold nuggets are found, like at the Witwatersrand, kilometers deep under the earth, and it takes lots of burrowing. In the same way, you can skim through the Word of God and pick up a lot of gold dust, but if you want to get the gold nuggets and the reefs of gold, you've got to dig deeper. Libraries provide an opportunity to improve yourself. Libraries provide free education, and libraries enable us to compare sources and discern. It's been said if a person says he can't afford a theological education, pick an argument with a Calvinist, he'll give you books to counteract. So if you want to get a free library, just pick an argument with a Calvinist. That's a quick way of getting free books. Libraries provide you with unlimited opportunities to improve yourself. Self-educated people cannot be fooled by institutionalized propaganda. If you've got books and you can read, and you've been reading as a habit, you'll know more, and you can be able to recognize the propaganda the moment the fake news brings it out. This is a sign of a healthy home. Children reading. A child who reads will become an adult who thinks. Libraries are essential for those who love the truth. Libraries are absolutely essential for those who love knowledge, wisdom, and truth. Truth does not fear investigation. Truth conquers. You know, when it comes to debates, we cannot get an evolutionist willing to debate a creation scientist. I've tried. We've had people out here like Dr. Dwayne Gish, who wrote the book From Fish to Gish from the Institute of Creation Research. Dwayne Gish, we tried to get evolutionists to debate him, equal time on radio and so on. No evolutionist was willing to do that. You can get Philip Stock down here, and he's a creation scientist from South Africa. He can't get any evolutionist willing to debate him because they know their arguments can't stand up to debate. But truth does not fear investigation. Truth conquers. And this is Elizabeth, our cat at Christian Liberty Books, ensuring that our textbooks are up to standard. Systematic sources for study. Up here in the upper room, we've got two libraries. We've got the Rhodesian Library behind me, and we've got Neil Herworth's library in the middle there by the piano. Neil Herworth was a military intelligence officer during the Second World War, and you can see that from his book selection. He donated his library to us. He used to be our accountant. But we've got other libraries down below, like the Reformation Library, our Missions Library. We've got a series of field libraries, Christian Action Library. So we've got several libraries in Livingston House. Libraries must be well organized, carefully categorized, neatly presented, and diligently maintained. They provide precious resources for many generations. Books are precious and books are valuable. They need to be protected from dust and dirt, from damp and damage. Therefore, we need to take special care as stewards of God's kingdom to preserve these precious resources for future generations. Now, just to give you an idea of how good books are often thrown away, I had a friend in America send me a book. It was a first edition of Livingstone's Travels. And inside, it had Library of Tennessee sticker, and then a big stamp discarded over it. In the top corner, I could see in pencil, $2. So this had been sold at a library sale where they were selling off a first edition of Livingstone's Travels. I checked on Google, what does the Livingstone's Travels first edition book cost? They start at $2,000 US. The library discarded a treasure, a first edition of Livingstone's Travels, sold it for $2, and it's worth $2,000. No wonder universities are a mess. They don't even know what they've got. They're giving away valuable first editions like that. We've got that book behind glass in our display cabinet down in our reception area. There's a lot of precious books out there that people don't realize. I've come across books in second-hand bookshops that are being sold for pittance that are seriously valuable. And people don't understand how valuable these books are. When I have a little bit of money, I buy books, said Erasmus. If I've got any money left, I buy food and clothes. Erasmus is the man who put together the Greek New Testament. Old books help us discover our sensibilities once common to us all. What they call common sense today is no longer that common, sadly. Redeem the time, read. Books build a stairway to your imagination. I wouldn't recommend storing your books like this, but this is a clever way of showing how books can be a stairway to success. And if you love reading and you enjoy learning, God will prepare you to make an impact for the kingdom of God. If you're willing to learn to work hard, you can discover almost anything if you love reading. And again, I wouldn't recommend standing on books, although there are some very big books out there, but they are stepping stones to success. Self-education is the only possible education. The rest is a mere veneer laid on the surface of a child's character. And I think that's true in my life. I've learned more from set work reading that I had to do and investigation that I have from the classroom. You know, what you hear in the classroom can help you to a degree, if it inspires you to do your own research. But face it, in your life, you can also remember some of the most important things you learned by your own research. People telling you things can help direct you in the right way, but we've got to love reading. I've always carried a book with me. When I've been in the army, they had these nice side panels in the army trousers. I always had a book in the side panel, and whenever we had to wait, which was often, hurry up and wait, at the shooting range, we'd be in 4 aflossings, 4 sections. And so for 3/4 of the time, you're sitting watching other people shooting. I'd pull out my book and I'd read. I got through books like Tortured for Christ, Run Baby Run, The Cross and the Switchblade, God Smuggler, at the shooting range in the South African Infantry. I read through those whole books. I can still remember what I read. And I read it at the shooting range with endless volleys of gunshots going off, but I was not at the firing line myself. I was sitting waiting for my next turn. I redeemed the time by reading. And it's amazing how much reading you can do. I got a lot of reading done just joining my wife for shopping. While I'm sitting there waiting and she comes out every now and then, what do you think of this? And good or whatever. And I could go through chapters waiting while shopping with my wife. You can get foundations for life. My mother taught me to read before I went to school. My earliest memories of reading books. The library was a great attraction to me. The Bulawayo Public Library was my favorite place. Many times I spent lunch breaks at school reading in the library. When I was growing up in Bulawayo, I'd walk to the library at least once a week and take out the maximum number of books allowed, 4 at a time. And by age 12, I'd left behind the Hardy Boys and the Secret Seven, other children's books. I was regularly checking out books from the adult section of the Bulawayo Library. And I remember the librarian peering over her glasses at me and asking in a very interrogatory tone, "You know that these books are meant to be read?" "Yes, ma'am," I responded. "Have you read all these books in the last week?" "Yes, ma'am, I have," I'd say. And she looked at me with skepticism, and the titles of the history books or wildlife books, which is what I tend to check out. "How old are you, boy?" "I'm 12 years old, ma'am." "And you read these books?" "Yes, ma'am." Well, my first job at Hospital Christian Fellowship, the first missionary I heard was Francis Grimm. He came to visit our church, and I ran to the front and joined his mission immediately afterwards. And one of the first tasks I was given when I joined Hospital Christian Fellowship was to sort out their library. They took me into a large room with empty shelves, and there was piles of boxes in the center of the room, and told, "Organize the library." Well, that's the kind of task that I relished. And my previous employment had been with Oxford University Press in downtown Cape Town. And at that stage, I had 22,000 titles to organize in categories and alphabetically. And before that, my job was at Script Union just down the road here at their bookshop. So organizing books was for me fun. A person's character is to a large extent developed by the books he reads. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge. So, what are some of the most important books ever written? Well, obviously the Bible is the most translated book in history. The whole Bible has been translated to over 770 languages, and 1,582 languages have only the New Testament. Another 1,196 languages have at least some portion of the Bible. So 3,495 languages have some portions of the Bible available, like a gospel at least. The Bible is the #1 best-selling book in all of history. More than 3 billion copies have been printed so far. The most widely read book ever. There's no question it's the most life-changing book. The most influential book in history has got to be the 1611 King James Version of the Bible. The Bible is the most valuable book in the world. The Gutenberg Bible, printed in 1456, sold in 1987 for $5.4 million. Find another book that could compete. Gutenberg Bible. One copy of William Tyndale's original printed New Testament was sold for over $5 million. Now, bear in mind, all of the first 6,000 New Testaments printed were confiscated by the Bishop of London and burned. They were smuggled into England. The first English New Testament had to be translated in Germany, smuggled from the Netherlands into England in bales of cotton, and those that were intercepted were burned. Almost all 6,000. Only 2 copies remain, and one was sold for £5 million recently. The impact of the Bible upon Western civilization has been absolutely enormous. The greatest art, the greatest literature, the greatest achievements in architecture have all been inspired by the Bible. The rule of law, the separation of powers, checks and balances, representative governments, the sanctity of life, compassion, charity, liberty, justice, all inspired by the Bible. When you delve into the Word of God, you find gold. But the deeper you dig, the greater reefs of gold that can be discovered. The Bible tells the greatest true story ever told about the greatest man who accomplished the most important task ever, the purchasing of our salvation with his blood. We need to renew our mind by reading through the whole Bible, which was one of my projects, studying and preaching through every book of the Bible and summarizing it in a chapter of Old Testament survey, New Testament survey. One of the most important books in the world to be written was Confessions by Augustine. This was an autobiographical work by Augustine of Hippo, written in Latin between 397 and 400 AD. It details Augustine's sinful youth and his conversion to Christ, and its original title was Confessions in 13 books. It is widely recognized as the first autobiographical book ever written, and an influential model for Christian writers throughout the Middle Ages. Confessions provides an unbroken record of the development of one person's thought process, and it's the most complete record of any single person from the 4th and 5th century. The first 9 books are autobiographical, and the last 4 are theological and philosophical commentaries. Augustine came from what today would be considered to be Algeria, North Africa. It begins with, "For thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." Confessions not only encourages conversion, but offers guidelines as to how you can turn to Christ. Every book or chapter begins with a prayer for God, like, "You have broken the chains that bound me. I will sacrifice in your honor." It is consistently recognized one of the greatest masterpieces of Western literature. Published in 426 AD, The City of God, also by Augustine, was written in response to allegations that it was the abandoning of the old pagan religions and embracing of Christianity that brought about the fall of the Roman Empire. So Augustine depicts the history of the world as a universal conflict between man and the devil, between God and the devil. Men build men's cities. Men destroy men's cities. But there's a city built by God, which no man can destroy. Our Lord Jesus Christ is the key, the focal point, the goal of man, the goal of all of human history. All of human history, whether collective or individual, shows itself to be a dramatic struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness. That's what the city of God is dealing with. The Lord is the goal of human history, the focal point of the longings of history and of civilization. The Lord is the center of the human race, the joy of every heart, the answer to all of its deepest longings. Which is why our calendar is as it is. The birth of Jesus Christ has separated the ages into BC, before Christ, and AD. Don't ever abandon that. Don't allow people to get you into BCE and CE. That's nonsense. We've got to use our Christian heritage, BC, before Christ, and AD in the year of our Lord. This is 2024 what? 2024 years since Christ came to this world. And so our whole dating system points to the centrality of Christ. Far from the polytheistic worship and idolatry being necessary to secure worldly prosperity, it is the idolatrous false religion which brings about the decline and destruction of any civilization. Rome didn't fall because it adopted Christianity and abandoned idolatry. Rome fell because of moral corruption. That preceded the fall of Rome. We need to live in the light of eternal judgment. The city of God is a cornerstone of Western civilization. The 4th book I'd point to is Lex Rex. Latin, lex means law and rex means king. Lex Rex meant the law is king. It used to be a common saying, rex lex, the king is the law, the king's word is law, the king is above the law. But the reformers inverted this Latin phrase to lex rex, the law is king. The subtitle of this book is The Law and the Prince, written by Samuel Rutherford in 1644. Lex Rex defends the rule of law and the lawfulness or defense of wars, advocating limited government and constitutionalism. Building on the arguments of the 16th century Vindici contra tyrannos, or in defense of liberty against tyrants, Lex Rex attacks the absolutism, the totalitarianism, where you've got a pope or a king at the top who's got absolute rule and people below must just take what they say. Lex Rex attacks that and emphasizes the importance of the covenant with God, ruling in accordance with God's law. Just as you owe allegiance to your king owes allegiance to the King of Kings. If the king is in rebellion to the King of Kings, we must not join in his rebellion against God. We must obey God rather than man. Lex Rex was an inversion of the popular term Rex Lex. And so it's now the king, not the king is law, but the law is king. God's law is the eternal standard. Any law not in conformity with God's law is invalid and it's no law at all. The fifth book I'd point to as amongst the greatest books ever written is The Institutes of the Christian Religion by John Calvin. First published in 1536, The Institutes is a monumental masterpiece. The final edition of the Institutes, published in 1559, contains more than 1,000 pages and 80 chapters. And it started as a letter to the King of France. John Calvin was pointing out to the king that, in fact, Protestants are not rebels, we're not heretics. We believe what the Apostles' Creed believes, and he expounds on the Apostles' Creed. We pray as the Lord's Prayer indicates, and he expounds on the Lord's Prayer. We behave as the Ten Commandments commands, and he expounds on the Ten Commandments. And it started out as a letter and ends up as a 1,000-page masterpiece textbook. Just shows what a man John Calvin was. He starts writing a letter and he ends up with a literary masterpiece. The Institute stands out as the finest textbook of theology, the finest manifesto for the Protestant faith, a handbook for catechism, a weapon against heresy, a guide to Christian discipleship. Calvin called it basic introduction for Christian discipleship. It's a systematic masterpiece and it's earned itself a permanent place amongst the greatest Christian books ever written. If they ask what's the greatest books ever written 1,000 years from now, Institutes of Christian Religion will probably still be in the list. And then there's Fox's Book of Martyrs, what Charles Spurgeon said should be essential reading for every child and the best present you can give any child at Christmas. Acts and Monuments, written by John Fox. First published 1563. The Fox's Book of Martyrs includes over 60 distinct woodcut illustrations. Now, when we say woodcut illustrations, you understand the printing press had to have text. So if you wanted a picture, you left a blank space, and then you had a woodcut, which is an artist that carved the picture on wood. So you used like an ink stamp pad into the ink pad and then onto the page. And if you've got these old books, you can see why sometimes they're a bit skew or smeared, depending how well the printer afterwards put in that picture. So woodcut is the only way they could put illustrations in before lighter plates and so on. The largest printing project ever undertaken in England. The book was over 1 foot long, 2 palms wide, 2 deep or thick to open with any one hand. It was 1,800 pages. It weighed the size of a small infant. The 1570 edition was in 2 volumes and expanded to 2,300 pages and 150 woodcut illustrations. So if somebody says they've got Fox's Book of Martyrs and it's not that big, you can be pretty sure it's abridged. Starting with the persecution of the apostles and the early Christians under Jewish and Roman persecution, Fox's Book of Martyrs includes a history of the Protestant Reformation and the vicious persecution by the papist Roman Church against Bible translators and Protestant reformers and dedicated believers. Acts Monuments was chained beside the Great Bible in cathedrals from 1571. It was greatly respected at Oxford and Cambridge universities and avidly read by soldiers of Oliver Cromwell's New Model Army. It was described as the single greatest influence on English Protestant thinking in the late Tudor, early Stuart period. Acts and Monuments helped to frame English consciousness, national, religious, and historical consciousness for 400 years. It includes the testimonies of people like Queen Jane, the 9 Days Queen, who was beheaded at age 16 for refusing to renounce her Protestant faith and was beheaded by order of her Catholic cousin, Queen Mary, or Bloody Mary. It inspired the Protestant faith of Queen Elizabeth's era and galvanized resistance against the Spanish Armada. Spanish Armadas bring the Inquisition. We must resist it. We are Protestants. 7th book I've got on my list is The Pilgrim's Progress, From the World to Come to That Which Is to Come by John Bunyan, published in 1678. Pilgrim's Progress has been translated to more than 200 languages. It's never been out of print for 350 years. This is the greatest book in English, second to the Bible. Written while Bunyan was imprisoned, Pilgrim's Progress is recognized as one of the most influential and successful best-selling books in English in all of history. When the judge condemned John Bunyan to prison, he said, "This is the last the world will hear of John Bunyan." Now, we can't remember the name of the judge, but we all remember John Bunyan. So was that judge ever wrong? Pilgrim's Progress has come out in many great editions, many of them illustrated. There's some beautiful pictures. John Bunyan himself was a soldier in Oliver Cromwell's army as one of the Roundheads. And John Bunyan depicted in Bedford Gaol prison, Bunyan's wife pleading with the judges to release him from prison. Some beautiful illustrated engraved positions. Charles Spurgeon said he read it 100 times in his lifetime. That wouldn't have been the abridged edition either. And Pilgrim seeking the Lord and coming out of the slough of despond. Mr. Worldly Wiseman directing Christian out of the way. Evangelist directing him back into the way to the wicket gate. Christian knocking on the sheep gate. Being allowed in. Goodwill receiving him at wicket gate. The man in the iron cage in the interpreter's house. His burden falling away as he comes to the cross. His burden comes loose and it goes into the tomb, which is covered by the stone, never seen again. Christian beginning his journey up hill difficulty. We can all recognize this when you're going up Table Mountain, often you come to hill difficulty. And prudence, piety, and charity at the palace called Beautiful. Formalist and hypocrisy trying to shortcut climbing over the wall of salvation, not going through the straight gate. Christian being given his armor in preparation for spiritual warfare. In the valley of the shadow of death, fighting Apollyon in the valley of the shadow of death. And spiritual warfare is part of our Christian discipleship. Christian giving thanks for his deliverance. Meeting talkative on the way. We've all met people like that. An atheist. And giant despair capturing Christian and hopeful. Giant despair harassing Christian and hopeful. In the hands of giant despair and doubting castle. By the river of God and the green fruit trees. And then the flatterer, interestingly, I see the film is not as true to this, because when the angel freed them from the net, the angel required Pilgrim and Hopeful to lie down on the ground while he whipped them for chastisement for them listening to the flatterer. And they leave that out of these modern films, sadly, but that is a fact that you get chastised by God and his angels for disobeying his commands. Evangelist and Christian faithful approaching Vanity Fair, and Vanity Fair and all the distractions and the trial of faithful, the cruel death of faithful being burned at the stake, faithful being taken by the angels up to the celestial city, Christian and hopeful escaping Vanity Fair, and Pilgrim battling his way into celestial city, at delectable mountains and the hill called Error, Demas inviting Christians and hopeful into the silver mines, getting distracted by the wealth of the world, Christian greeted outside the house Beautiful, Christian views Emmanuel's land from the house Beautiful, shepherds comforting Christian and hopeful, Christian hopeful gazing at the celestial city on the other side of the river, crossing the river of death, Christian hopeful needing help to cross over but being welcomed by angels at the other side, and the map of the city of destruction to the celestial city. These you can get in some of these illustrated versions of Pilgrim's Progress. Some magnificent books. If you've got one of those, they're real collector's items. The Tomb of John Bunyan in England. And the 8th book I've put in my list is An Inquiry into the Obligation of Christians to Use Means for the Conversion of the Heathen. William Carey's book, published in 1792, which led to the founding of the particular Calvinist Baptist Missionary Society for the propagation of the gospel amongst the heathen. That was the full title of the original Baptist Missionary Society. And this launched the Baptist Missionary Society and the modern missionary movement. So William Carey is recognized as the father of modern missions. This is what the front of the book looked like, actually. Number 9, I put Missionary Travels and Researches in South Africa by Dr. David Livingstone. We've got a first edition here, and we've got some of his pictures and posters up and on display in Christian Liberty Books as well. Published in 1857, Missionary Travels became one of the most popular travel works ever published in English, and it inspired huge amounts of missionaries to come to Africa, with 47 illustrations, engravings, maps, and portraits. And the Victoria Falls fold-out frontpiece. Missionary travels inspired unprecedented interest in Africa. It mobilized thousands of missionaries to evangelize and disciple the previously unreached tribes throughout this continent. And this is just one of the maps that we've got, which is on display downstairs as well. Number 10, I've put A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Published in 1859, A Tale of Two Cities contrasts Paris before the Revolution and during the French Revolution, and London affected by the Great Evangelical Awakening. With sales of over 200 million copies, A Tale of Two Cities is one of the most successful best-selling novels of all time. The clash between humanism and Christianity is so clear in this novel that the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher presented a copy of this book to the French President Francois Mitterrand in 1989, saying, "Read this book, see why the French Revolution was completely unnecessary." In Charles Dickens' classic novel, A Tale of Two Cities, he contrasts London and Paris. In London, he shows the fruit of the great evangelical awakening of George Whitefield and John and Charles Wesley. And he contrasts this with Paris, where the Renaissance humanism of Rousseau and Voltaire led to the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. Dickens' famous opening sentence summarized the drama of A Tale of Two Cities, probably some of the most famous words in English literature. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was an age of wisdom, it was an age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light, it was a season of darkness. It was a spring of hope, it was a winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. The contrast between Christianity and communism is dramatically presented throughout A Tale of Two Cities. One of the best books to understand the French Revolution I've ever read is Robespierre by Otto Scott. The fruit of the Protestant Reformation and the Great Evangelical Awakening was wisdom, faith, light, hope, and joy. The fruits of the anti-God radical secular humanism and the revolutionary fanaticism that triumphed in France in 1789 produced the worst of times, an age of foolishness, unbelief, darkness, despair, and misery. While they promised them freedom, they themselves are slaves of depravity. So it was most appropriate that in 1989, on the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady of Great Britain, presented French President Francois Mitterrand with a leather-bound first edition of Charles Dickens' immortal Tale of Two Cities book. And when reporters at the G7 conference in Paris flocked to ask Margaret Thatcher, "What are your impressions of the French Revolution?" she replied, "It resulted in a lot of headless corpses and a tyrant." And Margaret Thatcher's sense of the momentous events at this G7 conference was historic. It had been scheduled to coincide with the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution. They meant to make an historic statement. She made historic resistance. The Iron Lady's symbolic act of resistance was itself historic. Margaret Thatcher advised the French president, "Read A Tale of Two Cities. Learn why the French Revolution was completely unnecessary and counterproductive." Another great book I'd add to my list of some of the most important books ever written, Dr. Francis Schaeffer's book, How Should We Then Live? The Rise and Decline of Western Thought and Culture. Published in 1976, How Should We Then Live traces Western history from ancient Rome through the Reformation and the Renaissance, through the devastations caused by secular humanism and evolutionism. And Schaeffer warns of subtle forms of information control and psychological manipulation of the masses by unscrupulous governments. And we're there right now, the Great Reset and all that. Number 12, I'd add The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Published in 1973, The Gulag Archipelago exposes the brutal communist concentration camp system which destroyed over 50 million lives in the Soviet Union. Gulag was the acronym for Main Administration of Corrective Labor Camps. In a very inane name. By the way, Russian friends of mine say that KGB stands for Department of Homeland Security, which is what the Americans call their TSA movement, Department of Homeland Security. Main Administrative Corrective Labor Camps. How innocuous that sounds. Well, Alexander Solzhenitsyn discovered firsthand he was a war hero in the Red Army, artillery officer, but he wrote an unguarded comment about Stalin, which was not respectful enough. He referred to him as the mustached one. And for that unguarded comment in a private letter, he was consigned as a slave laborer to the Gulag archipelago, which had about 1,200 concentration camps across Siberia, Arctic hellhole. And the Gulag map, absolutely staggering. And to see what actually was like for the people going into the depths of the earth in the salt mines in the Gulags, and in unbelievable Arctic hellhole conditions. The freezing cold, 50 million were sent to freeze or starve to death in the 1,200 concentration camps of Siberia. Absolutely pitiful what it did to people and how it destroyed people's lives. I can't think of any film Hollywood has ever made on the Gulags. They make no end on fictional stories on the Second World War, but they don't record the real suffering that Christians have suffered in the Soviet Union under communism. But the stories are getting out, and bit by bit, but Solzhenitsyn did the main work. Millions of Christians were investigated, interrogated, tortured, imprisoned, and murdered for failing to comply with the political party orders or failing to pay homage to the dictator of the Soviet Union at that time. These are real people, and the Gulag archipelago is now required reading in Russian schools. 4 of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's books are now required reading in present-day Russia, like One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which is a good short story, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn gives you a one-day insight into a life in a concentration camp in the Soviet Union. Soviet forced labor camps. I would add also number 13 to this list, What If Jesus Had Never Been Born, written by Dr. James Kennedy and Jerry Newcomb. This landmark book tackles the most unbridled slanders and the attacks on Christianity, and it demonstrated everything good in this world, from morality to health, from art to economics, from science to civil liberties, would never have occurred had Jesus Christ never been born, had he never lived. So What If Jesus Had Never Been Born is, if you've ever seen the film It's a Wonderful Life, it considers what this town would be like if this one character had not been born. Well, James Kennedy looks at what would the world be like if Jesus hadn't been born. And it's a frightening picture, but it's inspiring. This is the man who also wrote Evangelism Explosion, which is excellent tools for evangelism. Another great book that has influenced us a lot is Understanding the Times, written by Dr. David Noble, first published in 1994. Understanding the Times provides a comprehensive guide to the most popular worldviews of our day. So it looks at secular humanism, Marxism, Leninism, the New Age movement, and contrasts it with biblical Christianity. So this is the chart that sort of looks overview of the whole book. The worldviews are compared to biblical Christianity. Dr. James Kennedy described Understanding the Times as more valuable than a university education. He said, if you can read this book, you'll learn more than any university education can give you, because it contrasts biblical Christianity on theology, philosophy, ethics, biology, psychology, sociology, law, politics, economics, and history with its competing worldviews. A summary of this, which to be easier to read, is The Battle for Truth, published by David Noble, which is a short summary of Understanding the Times. Another great book that I've thoroughly enjoyed is How Christianity Changed the World, by Professor Alvin Smith. First published in 2001, Professor Smith documents how Christianity established the sanctity of life, elevated sexual morality, gave freedom and dignity to women, invented charity and compassion, pioneered hospitals and healthcare, pioneered universal education, dignified labor, established economic freedoms, launched the scientific revolution, innovated liberty and justice for all, abolished slavery, produced the greatest art in architecture and history, gave the world its greatest music and literature, and additional holidays and words and symbols that have shaped civilization for centuries. That Christianity has transformed civilization. A great book. I would add another personal favorite, Freedom Betrayed, Herbert Hoover's Secret History of the Second World War and its Aftermath. This book by President Herbert Hoover, who spent most of his life documenting the insidious and treacherous schemings of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency and the subversive role of the American government in initiating and expanding the Second World War. America didn't get sucked into the Second World War. According to President Herbert Hoover, it initiated it. It put up Poland not to give back the territory stolen from Germany by the Versailles Treaty, not to give back Danzig and so on. It bribed Britain and France to give war guarantees to Poland. Britain had never given a war guarantee to anyone before that time, and Poland had never been an ally of Britain before that time. But America initiated getting Britain and France and Poland involved in the war, and then they stood back and they benefited. They didn't do anything to help Poland, didn't do anything to help Britain and France really in that first stage of the war. And basically, President Herbert Hoover documents how Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the initiator of the Second World War and was the one who benefited from it, bankrupted the British Empire, saved the Soviet Union, got South African gold to fund Lend-Lease in order to save the Soviet Union from being liberated and so on, betrayed a third of the world's population behind the Iron Curtain. Absolutely staggering. Freedom Betrayed is such a great book. It was suppressed by the US government for 50 years. It finally only came out in 2011 after being suppressed for half a century. But when you understand this, it forces you to rethink everything you thought you knew about the Second World War. Suppressed for 50 years, this challenges all historians of the 20th century with previously suppressed facts, which would radically alter anyone's understanding of the Second World War and its aftermath. Another book I read that affected my understanding of history is The Secret War, Spies, Codes and Guerrillas, by Sir Max Hastings. British journalist Sir Max Hastings, who had been a foreign correspondent for the BBC, editor of the Daily Telegraph, editor of the Evening Stand. He's authored numerous great historical books, chiefly on matters of defense. He's won major awards. Well, in The Secret War, Max Hastings examines the espionage and intelligence machines on all sides of World War II and the impact of spies, code breakers, and guerrilla movements on the events. He brings together British, American, Russian, German, Japanese sources to tell the unknown secret war waged throughout the Second World War, which profoundly affected its income. It requires virtually all history books on the Second World War to be rewritten. Another great book on the 20th century is Churchill, Hitler and the Unnecessary War, How Britain Lost to Empire and the West Lost the World, by Patrick Buchanan, who is the strategic thinker and scriptwriter research of Ronald Reagan. In this monumental history, Patrick Buchanan makes the case that if not for the blunders of British statesmen, especially Winston Churchill, the horrors of the two world wars and the Holocaust of World War II could have been avoided, and the British Empire might never have collapsed into ruin. Half a century of murderous oppression by hundreds of millions under the iron boot of communist tyranny might never have happened, and Europe's central role in world affairs might have been sustained for many generations to come. And millions of people who died in Africa in the last century would be alive today. So Churchill, Hitler and the Unnecessary War is a phenomenally important history book. It's a bold insight into the historic failures of judgment that tragically ended centuries of Christian European rule and guaranteed a terrible future that no one in this vanished world could have envisaged in their worst nightmares. You know, we're living in a dystopian future right now. If the people of the early part of the 20th century had seen how we're living now, they wouldn't have believed how dysfunctional this country can be. That literally, you know, did the people die in the First and Second World War so that their great-grandchildren could be trans, and that healthy girls could have mastectomies and healthy boys can have castrations and transgender surgery, and that you can get prosecuted for saying there's only two genders, or that, well, biologically there's only two genders, or marriage can only be between a man and a woman. That's now a thought crime. You know, is this what they all fought for? And for communism to have crushed so many people's lives. Another book that I found that's very helpful is Shake Hands with the Devil, The Failure of Humanity in Rwanda, written by United Nations General Romeo Delio. He was the commander of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Rwanda. He documents how the United Nations and the international community failed to prevent the slaughter of over 800,000 people, Protestant, Christian, Tutsis in many cases, in just 100 days in the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. Notice the subtitle, not the failure of the UN, but the failure of humanity in Rwanda. Number 20, A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind. Stephen Mitford Goodson was a good friend of this mission. I did his funeral when he died, and he is often a speaker at Reformation Society meetings. Economist Stephen Mitford Goodson was once director of the Southern Reserve Bank. He catalogues the hidden hand of moneylenders throughout history in fomenting wars, revolutions, depressions, recessions, and other social upheavals to retain and extend power and profits. In fact, he says you cannot understand the wars of the 20th century unless you understand the role of the banking community. And as he said, the South African Reserve Bank is not South African, it has no reserves, and it's not a bank. The Institutes of Biblical Law by R.J. Rushdoony is the last one on my list. Expounding the Ten Commandments, the Institutes of Biblical Law provides an outline for establishing essential foundations for free and productive societies. This has got a remarkable, detailed grasp of historical background and the impact on human culture. This 3-volume series is superior to any college degree program. A person who studies Institutes of Biblical Law will learn more than he could in an average theological college. Now, we believe in literature, and so from our mission we are distributing literature all over Africa, about 100 tons of Bibles and books every year, from here at Livingston House across, donating books to people in libraries across Africa. And you'll see we've got a lot of books and Bibles organized here. If anyone would like a Bible in your favorite translation, we've probably got it here. And we distribute Bibles all over Africa completely free. And that includes ministers, conferences, Bible colleges, different libraries that have been donated to us that we can donate to pastors in the field, bishops. And that includes Back to the Bible Mission, which is training missionaries and evangelists from all over Africa. We regularly speakers there, and I've had the privilege of serving General Shai Mulder, who's the principal of this college, who was a veteran of the battles on the border in Angola. And in the Valley of Grace near Barberton, this very productive mission base continues its work. And one of the jobs we had recently was to organize their library, 15,000 strong library books. We often donate books to the folks there. And this auditorium has now been turned into their library. And you can see people from all over the world come there. This is what the library looked like when we moved in, and we organized these books and Bibles into what today is a very productive library. And so giving you a feel for the new Back to the Bible library, this is an armory. And of course, we've got libraries here too. Any questions about gyms for the mind?